At this point, divisive feels like a cliche when it comes to CM Punk. Since returning to professional wrestling in 2021, CM Punk has been at the heart of controversy, disdain, and adulation in seemingly equal measure. With the constant backstage rumors fueling the online news cycle, all culminating in his dramatic firing from AEW, Punk's 2023 was no exception to this rule. As it always seems to do, Punk's acerbic and volatile personality led to constant petty conflicts that finally put a stop to his time in AEW. I'm not here to refute or deny any of the talk that's come out about CM Punk through the years. There's enough smoke to this fire to show that that man's never entirely innocent when these rumors start to circulate, and that he's often prone to escalating matters regardless. I'm not here to talk about all that. What I'm here to talk about is why CM Punk ranked as my 13th best pro wrestler of 2023. Beneath all the controversy and hubbub, I remain incredibly positive about CM Punk's contributions in the ring. Was 2023 the best year of his career? Certainly not, but it is one of his most fascinating. I feel that Punk delivered on an extremely high level throughout 2023, despite only having a few months of work and 12 matches to his name. So let's turn our eyes to the performances themselves, purely talking what happened between the ropes. Join me now as I review every CM Punk match of 2023.
August 13th, 2005, I left professional wrestling. August 20th, 2021, I'm back.
How many special people change? How many lives are living strange? Where were you while we were getting high? Slowly walking down the hall, faster than a cannonball. Where were you while we were getting high? Someday you will find me caught beneath the landslide, in a champagne supernova in the sky. Someday you will find me caught beneath the landslide, in a champagne supernova, a champagne supernova in the sky. Wake up the dawn and ask her why. A dream, she never dies. Wipe that tear away now from your eye. Slowly walking down the
Number 1. With FTR versus Samoa Joe, Jay White, and Juice Robinson. AEW June 17th, 2023. CM Punk returning in a tag team match is sort of an ideal bit of booking. It accomplishes several things for both Punk himself as well as the weekly Collision show. For one, this match sets up multiple rivalries and character dynamics that would be hugely relevant to Collision in the weeks to come. The highlight of that is the first in-ring interaction between Samoa Joe and CM Punk in nearly 2 decades, but also establishing the FTR rivalry against Bullet Club Gold. For another, this being his first match back, a tag limits Punk's in-ring time to minimize any detrimental effects of ring rust while maximizing the reactions he could get from a loyal Chicago audience. When Punk is in the ring though, it is time well spent. Him against Joe is the obvious highlight here, with Joe refusing to be overshadowed by Punk and going back to his old ways of bullying Punker with the kind of casual, malicious brutality that he does best. Small thing that wasn't picked up on commentary too is Punk stealing this little signature sequence from Joe to play mind games with his old rival. There's just an electricity in the air every time Punk and Joe share the ring. Just breaking up a pinfall creates tension that threatens to explode at any moment. Worth noting too that Punk's putting over the fearsomeness of Joe at every turn, spending his last moments with Joe trapped in the choke, which Punk simply has no answer for. Beyond all that though, the match as a whole has Punk's stylistic fingerprints all over it. This is perhaps not an individual contribution, but a shared philosophy for a patient, well-paced style of wrestling that escalates naturally to a big finish. At the same time, it demonstrates the kind of patience Punk applies to starting a new run. His limited time in the ring doesn't just help him overcome ring rust, but it also allows him to leave open-ended stories that he can resolve down the line. In this match alone, we have things like the question of his stamina. Could Joe or Jay survive getting hit with the GTS? Or can Punk ever escape Joe's choke? This is all best showcased in a tag match too. Punk can pick his spots, create interesting dynamics and problems for down the line, and still, the action keeps moving with everyone else in the match. Tag wrestling is a genre best suited to neatly structured matches built around heat segments working their way towards the bigger moments. Or, in simpler terms, it's just good-ass pro wrestling without too many frills. That's really all that it's about, and Punk does it so well. 4 stars for this one. Number 2, with FTR and Ricky Starks versus Bullet Club Gold. AEW June 24th. In a broad sense, everything that's great about this 8-man is the same as what made the last match so great. A multi-man tag filled with crisp action built around heat segments that lead to a hot finishing stretch. Of course, what makes this match notable are the details though. The first and perhaps most significant is the Canadian crowd.
Chicago anymore.
Even Kevin Kelly on commentary makes the comparison here to Bret Hart in 1997, where the reaction to Punk on any given night vacillates between hatred and adoration, but never indifference. The mixed but mostly negative reaction informs Punk's performance on this night. From the entrance to his time in the ring, there's a more smug swagger to Punk's movement. He's having fun soaking in the booze, and it translates in delightful ways through his performance. There's the obvious one in Punk doing the Hogan taunt and leg drop, but far more interesting is how this informs the transitions between segments in the match. For example, the way that Punk escapes the lengthy heat segment being put on him by the heels is by blatantly going after Jay White's eyes in the corner. He's real nasty about it too, and it rightfully draws boos. However, weekly colliders will note that this could very easily be read as a payback spot for Jay using a vicious eye rake the week previously to escape a GTS from Punk. Even better than the eye rake though is that it's not an instant comeback for Punk. To help maintain some of the babyface mystique about him, there are still a few more hurdles put in his path before he can finally make the big hot tag. On that note, it's an incredibly smart choice to have Ricky Starks play the big hot tag in this match. This forces Punk into a more active yet giving role than last week. Punk plays the face in peril, creating a new wrinkle on the tag dynamic from the week before, now that the heels are finally able to bring him into their corner. But at the same time, it allows a younger star like Ricky to have the big moment laying all the heels out towards the finishing stretch. There's a lot of other cool stuff in here too, like Punk's selling of his midsection throughout the heat segment and how it prevents him from tagging out too soon. I also love the greater sense of camaraderie between the babyfaces in this match, where they actively try to protect and cheer each other on in between big segments. It makes everyone involved feel a little more alive, connected, and most importantly, real. 4 stars for this one. Number 3. Versus Satoshi Kojima, AEW and New Japan Pro Wrestling, June 25th.
He's not even out here yet.
Hey, he touched the cup. I wonder if that'll be important later. To this point, this is the most heel-leaning performance Punk's put on yet. In front of the most hostile crowd so far, Punk emphasizes all his most troll-like sensibilities when working on top. It's just a grab bag of petty, annoying taunts to both the crowd and Kojima. The Hogan taunt and leg drop makes a return, but perhaps much more fun are how Punk projects his spite onto Kojima. He steals the peck pop, counts his punches out in Japanese, and of course, makes delightful reference to his famed shoot interview with Samoa Joe.
This match.
Kojima!
Oh, no.
Kojima! Lariat!
The announcers make reference to Punk using the Mongolian chops of Kojima's longtime partner, Hiroyoshi Tenzan, but another important moment is Punk using the Anaconda Vice as well. At this point, Punk has used the hold long enough that many casual fans will attribute it to him primarily, but Tenzan is actually the innovator of that hold. But just as important is how Punk works the other half of being a heel. This match is structured to make Kojima the hero, and so Punk spends much of the early minutes being overpowered by Kojima and bumping around the ring for him. I even love how Punk himself stooges for the Mongolian chops when Kojima's able to reclaim them for his payback. There's also the dignity that Punk affords Kojima here. Commentary makes a big point to note that if Kojima hits his lariat on Punk, it's game over. At no point does Punk get hit with the lariat and thus keeps that piece of lore intact and protected. And those push-ups after the bell rings? Yeah man, just perfect shitty little heel stuff. It's around this point in 2023 that I had to stop and properly consider, is CM Punk just the best wrestler in the world? Again? 3 3/4 stars. Number 4. Versus Samoa Joe, AEW, July 8th. Of all the matches in Punk's return up to this point, this match with Samoa Joe obviously has the most history going into it. Longtime fans like myself know that history well, and it's sort of natural to want Joe and Punk to lean heavily into the groundwork they laid in 2004 now that they're finally wrestling in singles competition once again. I think it's fair to say that Punk and Joe don't really do that. At least not to the kind of granular level that the true sickos maybe were hoping for. What we get here is more broad strokes. Joe remains the imposing juggernaut, and Punk's working to figure out a way to get the man down. The thing is that when Punk and Joe play the hits of a more fundamentally minded David versus Goliath dynamic, it comes across as timeless instead of generic. In that sense, this is a real great new wrinkle as far as a Punk performance in 2023 goes. It's a wonderful, undersized babyface performance against a bigger man. Everything is attuned, strategy-wise, to being alert and clever. He can't outstrike Joe, but he can at least stick and move, trying to use his quickness to slowly pick apart and wear the big man down. The week before, he said the best way to escape Joe's choke is not to get into it. This is actually an incredibly clever storytelling move because it places the maximum threat and risk during the match on when Joe gets the choke in. And the best part is that those choke attempts provide the high points of Punk's strategy. When Joe attempts to get it on while standing, Punk's keen enough to have a counter prepared before Joe can get the hooks in and ground him. At the finish too, it's Joe going back to the choke, with Punk now once again countering it with one of Joe's historical weaknesses, flash roll-up pins. The booking hit the problem that needed to be solved, established in week 1 of Collision with the choke, and had Punk's solution be the direct cause of his first ever win over Samoa Joe. Brilliant, if you ask me. Not a grandiose win, but one that fits. A great requel to the series, but with just enough space left to develop further on a much grander stage. 4 stars. Number 5, versus Ricky Starks, AEW July 15. I think it's around this match that my opinion started to diverge from most of the internet. I mean that even among those who had enjoyed Punk's previous outings on Collision, this match didn't land. On the contrary though, I find that this is one of Punk's most interesting performances of the year. Through much of this second run in AEW, critics and commentary both drew parallels between CM Punk and 1997 Bret Hart. The obvious reason for this is the visceral, polarizing reactions that Punk would get depending on the city he was in. I think Punk's ode to Bret has way more to it than vacillating crowd response and pulling from his moves and finishes regularly though. It has way more to do with the overall philosophies and ideas he brings to matches. In this match especially, I get much more from 1995 Bret, in that Punk is put in the position to be paired up against a popular, at the time, babyface wrestler that he's given the task of putting over before bringing out a big twist at the end with Starks' heel turn. Given that, I think Punk turns in one of the more nuanced and restrained performances of his run here in order to give Starks the best possible chance at success from this match. The dynamic plays out to be that these two are mostly competitive equals for different reasons. Stark is younger, more athletic, and has the charisma and history to have the crowd on his side. The latter can be a weakness though, with him indulging a little too often in playing to the crowd. As for Punk, his advantages come from being a little more crafty and mentally focused. He's plugging away at working Starks over without too much fanfare about him, and part of what occasionally costs him control is when he does eventually indulge in engaging with the crowd a little too much. I like this because it shows that while Starks has the ability to potentially beat Punk, it's Punk's adaptability and savvy that's making it difficult to put him away for good. In the end, Starks end up choosing absolute certainty over taking the harder path of finding a way to outdo Punk. Structurally too, this match is an interesting one because of how Punk likes to lay foundations for more to come. Given that this is their first time wrestling, Punk lays out problems that need solving, but also delivers on enough twists and turns to keep the match suited to the occasion. For example, Punk going to the well once too many when coming off the ropes a la Bret, or in the reverse, Punk learning in real time a really dope counter to Starks' spear. It's a really great example of Punk's restraint here, using the basics like headlock sequences and the hip toss reversals tell a really simple story of a young wrestler's poise being tested until he snaps and chooses the easy way out in the end. Is it the most natural choice here? Likely not, and I definitely see how leaning in more heel could have worked a lot better for Punk under this circumstance. But given everything, there's just something a lot more interesting about what we do have. Better? Probably not, but just way more fun to pick apart and discuss, in my opinion. 4 stars for this one. Number 6, with Darby Allin versus Ricky Starks and Christian Cage, AEW July 22. For the first time in his run, we get Punk in a straight 2-on-2 tag match, and it is pretty much the perfect setting for him. What we have here is an expanded version of the principles of the Southern Tag. In this match, we get to see a lot of the versatility that makes Punk so great as a worker. In the opening moments, watch how he's thrashing both Starks and Christian Cage to kick off a feel-good extended babyface shine for his team. Note too how Punk's first instinct when wrestling Starks is multiple pinfall attempts, calling back directly to the finishing sequence of their singles match. I also love the pains Punk takes to set up the transition into the heel heat segment. Christian has to distract the ref in the corner. Starks gives him a cheap shot. Then Luchasaurus at ringside gives him pause to allow Christian to blindside him and seize control. Brilliant stuff where you can see step by step the heels' game plan. As with the 8-man tag against the Bang Bang Gang, we see Punk in the role of the face in peril where he's excellent, and then again later on as the hot tag. I like him in both roles. It's in this tag though that I really want to give credit to his opposition though. Starks and Christian are so good in control. These are lengthy heat segments and they keep things varied and well executed enough to stay interesting. They employ some classic tactics like intercepting a hot tag, and they do that to perfection to keep the tension constantly ramping up. I also have to mention that Darby Allin is just ridiculously good in this, pitch-perfect understanding of the steamboat rule, constantly fighting back despite getting cut off, and stopped until he finally achieves the hot tag at the end. The match ends between Darby and Ricky, with Starks once again using the ropes to get the victory here. Again, just incredibly solid week-to-week booking that tells us everything we need to know for the payoff that's to come. Mechanically, structurally, everything here just comes together. The only real issue is the crowd's attention wandering about halfway through to something in the arena that I don't quite understand. Whatever. All 4 guys were pros enough to trust the work they were doing and keep things moving to put on CM Punk's best match in this run so far. 4.25 stars. Number 7, versus Ricky Starks, AEW August 5th. Here we come to the functional apex of the Punk-Starks feud. It seemed that there was more in the pipeline, but Real Glass, Crimea River and all that. But even then, as a follow-up to their first bout, this works so goddamn well, and importantly feels totally different in tone and execution to the first. We still have a split crowd, but my god, just listen to them here.
See a collar and elbow tie up this crowd, electric here in Greenville.
Think what you want about who should have been face or heel in this scenario. A reaction like that feels like a massive win in my book, at least. I think there's very fair criticisms about the necessity of turning Starks heel, and I wouldn't really argue too hard against them. My own personal take on that is I've always found Ricky's best work to be as a heel anyway, and I think that manifested in matches like this. That said, we do have a clearer dynamic now with Punk as the babyface and Starks the heel, and as such the match reflects those clarified roles. Punk's able to maintain early control in a babyface shine, for example, and later on Starks gets an extended heat segment instead of the more back and forth nature of their first bout. However, what I really like here is how the match still remains dedicated to the idea that Starks' youth and athleticism can win him advantages over Punk. Like when Punk's raking his forearm across Ricky's face in the corner, Ricky escalates the heat here, which makes it feel like a match naturally breaking down as the two competitors piss each other off increasingly. I also like how it's Punk getting mad enough to do the corner punches that allows Starks to drop Punk's body onto the top rope to initiate his control segment. I like Ricky's work in control as well, and especially how he found the time to antagonize Steamboat on the outside while working over Punk. In a fitting tribute to the man at ringside as well, Punk's use of the Steamboat rule here is really great, constantly finding small holes in Ricky's game to try and sneak some offense in, all slowly building to his eventual bigger comeback. It is a fittingly large comeback for how patient they've been with the heat too, a big old superplex that Punk hurts even himself doing to get back into the game. Speaking of Steamboat, I also just enjoy the history between him and Punk being on display here. Saving Steamboat from an attack was a big part of Punk becoming a beloved figure in Ring of Honor, and it's Steamboat's dedication to calling things right down the middle as fairly as possible that informed basically all of their interactions in 2004. No wonder then that CM Punk brings him back in 2023 to enact justice and finally put an end to the shortcuts Starks has been taking for the last few weeks. 4 stars. Number 8, with FTR versus the House of Black, AEW August 12. Another lengthy multi-man tag from Punk here that once again highlights many of his stylistic philosophies. We don't quite get a babyface shine, more of an extended introduction to multiple pairings within this dynamic. The big climax to that is having the first Punk-Malachi standoff, which actually works a little better in hindsight than when I first watched it. I don't care for the way it dips into the face-off on the ground and then the 3 teams on their feet, though that feels like FTR's touch, and I've really soured on that particular trope of theirs. When it all settles down though, there's a lot of good here. I enjoy the control segments on both Dax and Punk. I think Cash was still fully in his bag as a spectacular hot tag at this point, and I appreciate them taking the classic approach of focusing on the problem of getting the big man Brody King off of his feet. All that said, this feels just a little shy of great for me. I'm not the biggest fan of the House of Black as a collective, so that's part of it, but this also definitely didn't need as much time as it was given. The finishing moments too with Samoa Joe and Julia Hart felt more scatterbrained than naturally chaotic. A good match, but one that ends Punk's streak of hitting the great level on every outing. 3.5 stars. Number 9, with Darby Allin, Sting, and Hook versus Jay White, Swerve Strickland, Brian Cage, and Luchasaurus, AEW August 26. This fits nicely into the Collision main event tag formula we've seen utilized up to this point. Once again, it's a big multi-man tag that features 2 heel heat segments wherein the hot tag for the first becomes the face in peril for the second. In this case, we have Punk once again filling in the role of the first face in peril, with Hook being the intermediary hot tag and second face in peril. For Punk, I like that there's been a consistent thread week to week of the heels targeting his midsection. That being said, the heel team here feels the least cohesive, both as a whole and as individual performers in any of the initial Collision tags yet, which does drag this down a tad. The finishing stretch too feels a lot more like everyone getting a turn to hit their moves than something a little more properly plotted. But all of that is sort of helped by sticking to the tag formula that gives this a decently high floor despite not everything gelling together. Plus, one gets the impression that no one wants to go too crazy this close to Wembley. As far as very good, serviceable TV tags go, Punk at least adds the most interesting flourish at the end, using the finish to set up his coming match with Joe. 3.5 stars. Number 10, versus Samoa Joe, AEW August 27. Speaking of that match with Joe, I must admit that this is one of those matches that benefits so greatly from everything around it. The massive atmosphere of having 80,000 plus people in this huge stadium grants this match so much gravitas. That's only compounded by the long history these two wrestlers share together. It can't help but feel like a massive victory for the freaks like me who have been deeply invested in the 2000s super indie scene. The match itself feels like it's wrestled in an appropriately massive manner. This is one of those matches that has the weight of history on it. First of all, there's how well it relates to their history as rivals. Much of the match feels like Joe cutting off many of the strategies that Punk's utilized against him through the years. Early rope-a-dope and headlock, Joe gets out of the ring to break it up. Punk finally outsmarts Joe's walk away from a dive. Joe lures him back out to eat shit on it on the floor. Then, just when Punk feels like he's about to find some purchase, bam! Disaster. Just as in their third match together in ROH, Punk now finds himself bloodied and at a deep deficit against Joe. This far down, and with someone as imposing as Joe, how does Punk gain himself the win in the end? He's got to get down and dirty, of course. Biting Samoa Joe on the top turnbuckle is what gets Joe in position for Punk to finally do what he's never been able to. Nail the Pepsi plunge and decisively pin Samoa Joe. But there's even more to that match than that. At multiple points, the match feels like it's carrying the weight of American wrestling itself on its shoulders. How does Punk get into his big comeback against Joe with the 5 moves of doom setup he took from John Cena that he applied to Eddie Kingston back in 2021? And then, as he has for this whole run, he hits the Hogan leg drop on Samoa Joe. But here's the beauty of it. Even here in Wembley Stadium, Punk finds the nuance of his controversial position as a character. He doesn't mind slotting into a more heelish role for the split crowd. That's why it's so satisfying for Joe to kick out at 1 for the leg drop, paying off this little mini story Punk's been building on Collision, and then paying Punk back in kind with the big "you." This happening so soon after Terry Funk's passing means that Punk's also paying tribute to him. The blade job in spirit, yes, but also things like the seesaw sell in the ropes or the spinning toe hold more obviously later in the match. Like with Brett though, Punk's tribute feels so much more whole than just borrowing moves. It's the matter of the thing, the heart of it, putting all these pieces from the history of pro wrestling into a cohesive story. It's the understanding of why those things work, the catharsis of seeing a heelish figure being battered, the way that going low when your opposition goes high sometimes wins you the day. In the process of accomplishing all this, Punk elevates his own history, his own work with Joe onto the same plane of mythology as all of the greats that came before them. This one was for all the nerds buying DVDs, scouring the internet, downloading things off of long-dead hosting platforms. It's a CM Punk performance that feels bigger than itself, an almost perfect conclusion to his time in AEW. If Punk had decided to call it a career right here in this moment, there probably wouldn't have been too many better ways to do it. In his last match in AEW, CM Punk wrestles one of the best matches of the year. 4.25 stars. Number 11, versus Dominik Mysterio, WWE December 26. Just to get it out of the way, as far as Punk in the WWE goes, I don't love it. There's just not a lot of people on that roster I really care about watching him against, and the more heavily produced nature of the current day product means that Punk lacks a bit of that raw nerve that made so much of his AEW run really strong. Even more so than in the late 2010s, which is really quite something when you think about it, the WWE doesn't feel like it's set up to be a place for CM Punk to thrive. As for this match itself, look, I get it. It's a house show match in MSG the night after Christmas. The effort from both here really does reflect that sort of laid-back and relaxed kind of atmosphere. It's a lot of posing and playing to the crowd, Dom cheats his way to the advantage with constant interference from Rhea Ripley, and Punk makes his comebacks by centering on big punches. The latter aspect makes me think of Daniel Bryan's SummerSlam match against The Miz in 2018, just executed in a much lower stakes, lax way here. There is a charm to it though, even if it's not the most thrilling thing in the world, and Punk gets the win by countering a Three Amigos attempt into the GTS. House show fare, nothing to set the world on fire by any means. 2.5 stars. That being said, this match ends up being must-watch for the bigger picture of Punk's work because of Number 12 versus Dominik Mysterio December 30. I'm not sure just how much in-ring experimentation goes on at WWE house shows. I imagine there's a lot of it just because of the creative freedom that the lack of TV exposure allows for. At the same time, it's also not crazy to simply use it as a way to get your reps in, fine-tuning certain templates and formulas until they're absolutely TV ready. All that said, there's really no reason that this second of 2 house show matches with Dominik Mysterio should feel as carefully plotted and distinct as this. In basically every way, this feels like a direct escalation of the action from the MSG match. One of the key factors for this stems from Rhea Ripley not being in Dominik's corner. On his own against Punk, Dom's a little less loose and cocky, and actually chooses to focus on more direct contact. His transitions into control also have to be a little more sneaky as he doesn't have Rhea running interference for him. There's a couple neat Punk touches as well. Tossing Dom over the top to hype up the Royal Rumble is fun, but his stylistic touch is best felt in the overall structure of the match. It's the way that Dom's able to progress against Punk compared to MSG. For example, being able to finally nail the Three Amigos this time, but still eating shit when attempting the Frog Splash, or later on when Punk does catch Dom trying the 619 for the sharpshooter attempt, Dom is actually able to counter on his own with a pinfall attempt. The big one is the finish with Punk using the exact same setup for the GTS he won with in MSG, but this time Dom being ready for it, forcing an in-the-moment counter from Punk to finally nail the GTS and get the win. It's a neat little 2-match story of Dom being forced to raise his game and learn without Rhea as a crutch, but Punk just being a little too savvy to be overcome. Again, not a great match per se, but one that shows that the same intangible qualities that made Punk's work great in AEW and across his entire career were still present even when the cameras weren't rolling in the WWE. 3 stars. After fiddling with this script on and off for the last 6 months or so, I'm writing this conclusion now in the middle of February 2024. Where we sit now, CM Punk has once again been injured in the Royal Rumble, basically putting a premature stop to his return to WWE TV. It's a shame that Punk's time back in wrestling continues to be plagued by injury, even if it does spare me the need to tune into WWE programming. But as 2023 showed, the capacity for greatness is still there with CM Punk. His best qualities in the ring have always been the intangible: structure, selling, and that unmistakable magnetism that makes everything he does feel must-watch. It's his larger philosophy in his approach to pro wrestling that leaves me constantly impressed. It's not always perfect, and the struggle will only continue to grow as time and injuries pile up, but I've always found that the best pro wrestlers make the most of the products of the mind and spirit rather than with the body. CM Punk was the 13th best wrestler of 2023. Circumstance and his own poor choices kept him from rising any higher. I don't know what the future holds for CM Punk, if his eventual comeback will meet the lofty standards he's set across his entire career. But in 2023, he put on a string of performances that drew me in and left me so much to chew on as far as analyzing the things I love about pro wrestling. I doubt this video is convincing anyone who's made up their mind about Punk's work, and that's totally fine. This isn't really for you. It's just a document of my personal reaction to one wrestler's calendar year. Best in the world? Not quite. But in 2023, it was closer to the truth than you might think. Thank you once again, everybody, to getting to the end of the video. I appreciate your patience, as always, for waiting me to get this up. I want to send a massive thank you, of course, to SamTheVAMod for helping edit the video, as well as to IQ Wrestler for assisting Sam with the wonderful title sequence, which I truly adore so much. And of course, I want to say a huge thank you to all my supporters over on Ko-fi. Thank you to Il, Liz Loves Luger, Jordan Ilagan, Bradley Grehan, Colette Aran, Dan Vasura, Julian Ortiz, DJ, Joe B, Riri, Nicholas Anderson, Ben Thrifty, The King's Heavenly Road, Con, Pat Speed, Quentin Expert, Gary, Nolan, CJ, Corey Bailey, Pro Wrestling Outsider, Orchid Sugini, Eric T, and Angel of Grappleholics for your donations. And of course, a massive thank you to all my monthly donators in James Draper, Captain Jack Heartless, Eddie Roberts, Jacob Dickens, Chick Fritz, Spiders in My Bed, Timothy R. Buchner, Indelaine, Peter Vinnison, Kid Kingpin, Joe Humphreys, Christopher Jackson, Four Pillars of Hell, Sean Emily, Mason Rollison, Carved Kutta, Jacob VR, Merch Table Mafia, Ando Commando, Vibe MD, Christoph, Quentin Besnahard, Christopher Richards, Dom G, Austin Shermer, Wrestling Playlist, Woo, Francois DeBuck, Justin Roberge, Secret Cow 42, and Matt Wasung. You guys are absolute champions and heroes. Thank you so much for continuing to support the channel. If you guys haven't heard yet, I'm now on Twitch as well. I typically stream on Saturdays, either during or after Collision. So check me out at twitch.tv/JosephWeirdness. You guys have been absolutely fantastic. I'm always so grateful for the support you guys give. Thank you for joining me once again, and have a good one.